I've got these videos that are actually the beginnings or reflect the foundations, I should say, of what Treaty of Peace 2020, or what we now call Bill of Peace 2020, because we will be going to Congress for a bill. 5 presentations were done to the county commission because I was basically petitioning for redress of grievances, and I was also saying, rule of law, do we have it? Do we have the rule of law? And it turns out these videos are going to show you that we do not have the rule of law. That's the problem. We have a contract which has been voided. It's called the Constitution. It's what enables the government to say that they have legitimacy in telling us what to do, when to do, how to do it, and what happens if we don't do it. So this is very important. It involves the churches too, because Article 6, Section 47 of the West Virginia Constitution prohibits incorporation of churches, and that was stated to the West Virginia Supreme Court. So everything you've seen in these current events and everything that Bill of Peace 2020 stands for coincide. In other words, you see all these things happening. The question is, if there is a method, a mode, a way that the Lord has orchestrated to circumvent that, to serve Him instead of Caesar, what are you going to do? It's your choice. So, by the way, the sections that you're going to see here, Butch came from a production called Revelation: Dawn of Global Government. If you haven't seen this video, you want to see it. The music is by Charlie Daniels, and it's fantastic. I titled this Rule of Law, Do We Have It? We commonly call those $100 up there, 1950 issue. That was the year I was born, the top one. The bottom one's 2009. But is it really $100? There's a little note up in the corner, the left-hand corner on the top and the right-hand corner on the bottom. And we're going to look at those close up here. The top one says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury or any Federal Reserve Bank. So it's telling you it's legal but not lawful. Redeemable and lawful. Okay? The other one says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And as a matter of fact, the top one says, in the middle, we'll pay to the bearer on demand $100. Well, if you're going to be paid $100 for that, well then that really isn't $100. Okay? We're talking legal, lawful, constitutional here. Our Constitution says, Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin. And it says, no state shall, and it goes on to say, make anything but gold and silver coin a legal tender in payment of debts. This is $100. Worth $1,600. Up there, what I showed you is not worth $1,600 because this kept its value, whereas everything else, and I just want you to see, this is like 6 pounds of silver. Very heavy. But take a look at it, okay? And all those bills that I'm showing you are on the table there, and the sheriff's here. Okay. Just to warn you, run Joyce here. But, something's happened. The Constitution is not the supreme law of the land anymore. We say it is. Now, this man back here who came all the way up from Beckley today for this is his check. And he wrote a letter to the tax commissioner and said he wanted to be paid in lawful money. That's an honest request. He wanted to be paid in lawful money. What the Constitution says is money. But it was denied by the tax commissioner. The tax commissioner said he could not give him lawful money. As a matter of fact, when I went to buy a car one time, I went to Belington Bank and they asked for collateral, and I said, can I give you gold? And they said, no, there's 2 things we cannot take. It's collateral, gold or silver. Now think about it. Lawful money, a bank can't take. It's illegal to have lawful money in a bank to take it. Some of you may remember silver certificates. This is 1935. This is 1934. Interesting how it changed. Okay, it was Roosevelt that added the rather occultic symbols, or at least the occultic symbol on the left there. And the $5 bill on the top, this is very interesting. 1963, it only came out in 63. It was issued by Kennedy. Notice on the top it says United States note. This says Federal Reserve note. Of course, when we say a bill, what's a bill? That's something you owe. Notes, these are debt instruments. We do not have money, we have debt instruments. Okay? Is it important? Well, our founders thought it was important. And shortly after Kennedy died, his body was probably still warm. Lyndon Baines Johnson rescinded the executive order that Kennedy had to bypass the Federal Reserve, which is a private, for-profit bank. This is Gene Steinecker, and I'm Phil Hudak. We're in Charleston. It's February 24th, and we are going to serve some legislators with a petition of redress of grievance. And then in 1933, remember when they confiscated the gold? Roosevelt actually had Congress pass an act giving him dictatorial powers as long as we were in a state of emergency, and suspended the Constitution. See, here's where West Virginia comes in. Our Constitution states that it is valid during wartime and peace. In wartime and in peace. Well, the federal government said, no, you've lost your rights because we're in a period of war. But we will grant you rights by a license, which is permission to do that, which is otherwise illegal. And basically, we want to just bring this to the public that, something's wrong with this picture. Something has to be done because my children, my grandchildren, I don't know if you have children?
I don't have any children, but I have relatives younger.
Yeah. Yes. Well, they really don't have a future if we don't have the rule of law.
Roosevelt did this. Roosevelt did it,
yeah. This is 1933, what was posted in post offices. You had to turn in your gold on or before May 1st, or you got $10,000 fine or 10 years imprisonment. Now, I can tell you in 1933, $10,000 was a lot of money. Okay? How did this happen? Because we were in a state of emergency. It was called the War Powers Act of 1933, when our Constitution, federal and state, was suspended. And here's what's interesting. Here's what Roosevelt said. Here's his proclamation. Now, therefore, I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States, in view of such continuing national emergency and virtue of the authority vested in me by a congressional law that was written by the Federal Reserve. They actually wrote the law for him. And notice the last line, continued in full force and effect until further proclamation by the President. It's never been rescinded, folks. We're still in a state of emergency. War on poverty, war on crime, war on terrorism, war on drugs. They can do anything they want. Obama can do anything he wants. He is not bound by the Constitution. Hasn't been since 1933. And this is 1973, what a senator, Congressman Beck said. The vast powers taken, this is 73, this is 40 years afterwards. He said the vast powers taken together confer enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, communication, regulate operation of private enterprise. How about GMC? Restrict travel and will throw away control the lives of all Americans, and this situation has continued uninterrupted since March 9, 1933. So the majority of people in the United States have lived their lives, entire lives, under a state of emergency. Here's what our Constitution says at the bottom. It says, the provisions of the Constitution of the United States and of this state are operative alike in a period of war as in time of peace, and any departure therefrom or violation thereof under the plea of necessity or any other plea is subversive of good government and tends to anarchy and despotism. We're moving into anarchy and despotism, I'm afraid to say. This is in this room. talked about the rule of law and federal intrusion, and this involves both, and that is, and I'm going to read from the West Virginia Constitution.
Sure.
No charter of incorporation shall be granted to any church. Now, the reason for that is so a corporation is a creation of the state, and a corporation is controlled by the state to some extent. And how can we have a moral society? You know, we have the drug problems and a lot of things that have to do with morals and a moral meltdown that we're seeing in our country, and yet the churches in West Virginia, by the Constitution, are actually supposed to be free of the federal government, the IRS, you know, this overreaching federal intrusion that we see, you know. And my question is do we have a constitutional crisis?
Well, I take every one of your comments very seriously, and I was able to look a little bit at the issue you had provided to our office prior. I would say this, the state constitution always you need to breathe meaning into it. And there is a specific provision in place, Article 6, Section 47, and that's very relevant. So we're just beginning to look at some of that case law, that issue that you brought to our attention. I can tell you that I take very seriously the First Amendment to the Constitution. And as many of you may know, we have weighed in on issues pertaining to religious freedom.
Okay, for 2 years, we've been waiting for an answer from Mr. Morrissey, who offered us an answer. He did to Gene Stonecker while we were down there. Pastor Mike House went with us from Randolph County. Right there is the law. It says there, no charter of incorporation shall be granted to churches. And I can tell you this, churches are scared to death of the IRS because the government now, you know, you've got to do what is politically correct, okay? So basically, I took this to the churches, the DVD set that I've given you commissioners. It's a tremendous video. Charlie Daniels narrates part of it, and I'm telling you, we're in trouble, folks, because the churches are afraid of the government. You can't have muzzled churches in a moral society. It isn't going to happen. So the Constitution Party met. I proposed a resolution that we get back to the rule of law. In Pittsburgh, the National Constitution Party, they passed a resolution. Here's what they said. Be it resolved by the Constitution Party National Committee that we publicly demand the people's representatives in all three branches of West Virginia government acknowledge that a constitutional crisis exists and to immediately begin to rectify what is currently a clear and present danger to the liberty and well-being of its people. And then it goes further on, all states should get involved in this battle for the rule of law, for our Constitution.
And everyone has to follow the law. No one is above the law. But we know that the administration's track record on the rule of law is very poor.
So I want to leave you with this. Article 1, Section 2 of the West Virginia Constitution. Internal government and police. Listen to this. The government of the United States is a government of enumerated powers, and all powers not delegated to it nor inhibited to the states are reserved to the states or to the people thereof. Among the powers so reserved to the states is the exclusive regulation of our own internal government and police, and it is the high and solemn duty of the several departments of government created by this Constitution to guard and protect the people of this state from all encroachments upon the rights so reserved. We see the government running over the states with illegal immigration and everything else, and I bring it to you folks because you took an oath to the Constitution. You are our representatives. I want you to contact Mr. Morrissey. I want you to contact the governor and the legislature and say, we have a constitutional crisis. And you've been addressed. You know this. What are you going to do about it? You know, I took an oath to the state and federal Constitution in 1974 with my first teaching license. I didn't bring it here, but you know, I take it seriously, and I'm handing the ball to you. But it's all our jobs, everybody here, not just government. It's us, not just them. They're just our representatives, and I want to thank you.
Under public comment, we have had 3 individuals sign up to speak. Mr. Phil Hudak, Pastor Mike House, and Mr. Gene Stoniker. So Phil, if you want to start, please limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
Okay, each of us 5, yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, we are live streaming this,
Okay.
and I'm here to really address Joyce's prayer, which is that we ask God for help, because I was hoping the sheriff would be here, because we do have a problem. It's not unique to Randolph County, but drugs and crime is a problem we have, and I'm sure the county commission can attest to that. But Pastor Mike is going to go first, and we're going to have a video here which you'll have comments about it. Then I'll go second, and then Gene Stoniker is from Beckley, and he's going to go third.
Pastors of the church in this nation in the 1700s literally were the fire behind the revolution.
America, God is still sending his prophets.
They taught their people that there was only one king, and his name was not George, or not the civil state at all, but Jesus.
There are prophets that telling you about all these things. You have to listen.
The church's trustees and pastors can be and have been arrested already in America for standing on the principles of what the scriptures tell us.
I met Christians in Magadan. Some of them were in prison for 25 years. They worked in the gulags because they were preaching the gospel.
Further, it states, no substantial part of the activities of the corporation. Notice that they're not saying church, they're saying corporation. You have become incorporated. No substantial part of the activities of the corporation shall be carrying on the propaganda. IRS page, publication 557, page 17. Propaganda is normally defined as spreading of doctrine. The doctrine of Christ is one example of doctrine.
Where we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
Something that we're told over and over again is that politics has no place in the pulpit. Now I want you to think about this. When the founders talked about politics, they didn't mean Democrat and Republican like we do today. They didn't even have political parties. When they used the word politics, they meant the biblical principles that undergird a right and just government. Now, out of all the institutions that God created, 3 of them, the family, human government, and church, are critical. Now, why would it be that God would create government and then tell his people to stay out of it?
The 501c3 religious organizations are structured to serve 2 masters. Now, folks, Christ tells us you cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot serve God and mammon, mammon being man and money and wealth and materialism. The church has lost its power in this stand. The church once was the pure, solid foundation for this nation.
So where did this idea of separation of church and state come from? Because you certainly won't find it in the Bible, and you certainly won't find it in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. In his farewell address, George Washington said that our republic could not exist if we did not have morality and religion.
Pray. Pray God's mercy will prevail.
In America, we have so many preachers, but they're concerned more about people being happy.
So this concept of the separation of church and state is actually a lie.
This nation was and is a Christian nation, Mr. Obama, and we're getting off the couch. We're going to turn the TV off. We're listening now.
Pastors today believe that somehow it's written into the Constitution. They'll often say, well, the First Amendment says that we have to have a separation of church and state. But I challenge you to look at the First Amendment. You won't find the words separation, church, or state.
The only hope for America is for the church to repent.
Everybody said this is impossible to reach every home. But after 22 years, we reached 64 million people.
Come out from this horror of this world system and the civil powers that now control them, and stand for righteousness once again with the integrity and the fire of righteous indignation in their bones and in their spirit and in their hearts and their mind, to the point that they will not compromise, that they will speak the truth no matter what the cost. Let the civil authority do what they may. The church must stand for truth, or America is finished.
With God, everything is possible.
Listen to the heartbeat of America.
As mentioned there on the video, the church, the family, and the state, those are the institutions God's working through today. And we're finding, as all of us know, that there's certainly many problems. And the root of that is the family. There's a real problem in the family, And I was at a Development Authority meeting just a week or so ago. Heather Viola was there with Kids Count. And she shared some statistics that were quite disturbing about how in Randolph County we're the 50th of the counties in care of our children, the highest teen birth rate, the highest suicide rate of the state in Randolph County. Tells me there's a problem. And obviously, as Phil mentioned, drugs are at issue in that. But, you know, folks, they were there to speak to the Development Authority about receiving some help. And today, there's going to be those who are requesting help from you guys. And that's certainly nothing wrong with that. And you know, wherever the County Commission Development Authority can help is good. But money is not the answer. And that's what's the issue. You know, we can pour, you know, the Board of Education, we're pouring money into our schools. And there's millions of dollars going into our schools, but we're still getting the same results. And that's because we're not changing what's going on. What has to happen, and the only hope there is for the church and God's people to be involved. And we've got to see the church alive again. The church is not a corporation. The government is not to control the church and to keep the church from carrying on. We're to have free exercise of our religion. And so we need to have that opportunity. And when that happens, it hinders the church. One of the things I appreciate, we're getting ready to build a church building. And fortunately in our county, the building ordinances, there's not building ordinances that hinder us from doing what we need to do as a church, and I appreciate that. Hopefully it'll never be an issue where ordinances are passed that would hinder, but there still are delays because there's several things that the government does require, from the Highway Department to the DEP, which held us up for several months last year by fining us and giving a cease and desist order. The government has to give us the freedom to do what we've been called to do in preaching the Word of God and carrying on the work of God. And so I would trust that the County Commission, those of you here as a part of that, would be mindful of that you would not do things that would hinder the church from doing what needs to be done. Because as the church and the government and the people, families work together, we can see a change. That's the answer. Word of God. And I appreciate again the
Thanks, Pastor May. What we're here about really is the rule of law. And this is going to be a very focused thing because the County Commission has a duty, just as we have a duty, that we have the rule of law. And what you're going to see here is on the internet. It's very disturbing. This is Wesley Clark, a 4-star general. Okay? This is 2007. And listen to what he's going to tell you happened in 1991.
And we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, "Sir, we're going to attack Iraq." And I said, "Why?" He said, "We don't know." He said, I said, "Well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, "No." And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, "Oh, sir," he says, "it's worse than that." He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, "I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran." I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, "Is that a classified memo?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." He was about to show it to me. He said, "Because I want to talk about it." And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. To sort of deter conflict, we're going to invade countries, and my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century.
Now, Mike, I believe you and I are about the same age. I was born 1950. Here's 4 wars, another 4, that's 8, 12 wars, 16 wars, 17 wars in my lifetime, and not one of those was a constitutional declared war. Not one. Every one of them was unconstitutional. Okay? So since I've been born, and this is a presentation that I gave to WVU to a history class, it's now 53 years we've been at war, and 13 years of my life we haven't been at war. That's my lifetime, and yours too. The U.S. Constitution says, Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to declare war.
But we know that the administration's track record on the rule of law is very poor. And everyone has to follow the law. No one is above the law.
You know, he says no one's above the law, but in here 2 years ago, I approached him with the Constitution of West Virginia says no charter of incorporation shall be granted to any church or religious denomination. 2 years ago. And he said, you know, the Constitution is I take it very seriously, and I'll get back with you. And this is the actual hand-penned, which I found in the archives. This was hand-penned in 1872, and it says, no charter of incorporation. It's word for word exactly what we have in our blue book. And this is 2014 when I met with Patrick Morrissey, asked him that question. Okay? And I took an oath in 74 when I got my first teaching job to support the Constitution of the United States and West Virginia. And it's more than just you've taken an oath, I've taken an oath, and I don't care whether you've taken an oath or not. This is from West Virginia's Office of Budget, West Virginia State Budget Office.
Department of Revenue.
Yeah, and it says we are the top of government. We are the government. It's just we delegate it, that's all. Okay? That's 15 years difference between me sending to everyone in our legislature, every sheriff, every county commission president, either a VCR or a DVD. Okay? In which case, I took a case to the Supreme Court, which is still pending, and the West Virginia Supreme Court is in default and dishonor. Now, John Adams says we have no government armed in power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made for religious and moral people, wholly inadequate for the government of any other. Well, the sheriff knows we have a drug problem, don't we? Big time. And that's what this is, focusing on, because our preamble of our Constitution says we were founded through divine providence. If we don't still have divine intervention, we're going to lose it. Now, you all have a video there, okay? Everyone got one up here. It's called An Appalachian Dawn, and you won't find this in mainstream media, but there is a town not far from here in southeastern Kentucky, in Clay County, that absolutely turned their town around, which you're going to see a video that Gene's going to tell you about. And
Bill, you're running out of time, even with the three of you, so you can...
Let him go ahead and finish.
Yeah, so you got about 5 minutes left.
Go ahead and finish.
Okay, there's the crime rate. There it is. West Virginia, right there. One of the highest states in increasing incarceration rate. This is Gene's presentation.
Once a year we have a bluegrass festival, and people come from Indiana and Ohio and everywhere.
Believe me, it's a treat too, because it's good food, good picking and grinning, good music.
In early 2000, while most of the world was celebrating the dawn of a new millennium, Clay County was on the verge of losing an entire generation to drugs.
Every neighbor I had sold drugs, abused drugs.
I was drinking and smoking marijuana every day, and eventually got to where I was doing the pain pills every day.
You wake up in the morning, think about using, you go to bed thinking about using, you do anything for that drug.
It had that hold on me. I would do anything to get it.
It took something like drugs that everybody, you could walk in at that time into any church in Clay County. You say, how many of you have somebody in the immediate family that's on drugs, and 95% of the people would raise their hands.
This is my child.
And that drug, that sin, brought us together.
Then, on the verge of oblivion, a spark of anger. The community might go down, but they would go down fighting.
We covenanted together that we were going to fight together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side.
People got tired of burying the kids. I think it just finally got to a boiling point where people just absolutely said, that's enough.
You took sides that day. And either you're going to side with corrupt government or you're going to side with God.
And something broke. A line of people all bunched together, and it was almost a mile long. I thought, wow. I thought, God is really doing something here. He's really doing something.
Truth was told before us, written by his hand. The word of God for all to see, like footprints in the sand. Listen now and you will hear the misery of your plight. When dawn becomes a morning, the darkness put to flight. Oh, oh, brothers, can't you see? Oh, oh, sisters, why can't we join our hands and walk with him, the man from Galilee? Join our hands and walk with him, the man from Galilee. Backed into a corner and off misunderstood. Dreamed about a future where
Okay, y'all got the book, textbook, Tea Party, 1974. This is what happened in Charleston. Gene was part of it. He was detained for speaking up, and so you each got a signed copy by the author. Okay, his name's Carl Priest. These are some of the scenes. A lot of people don't know what happened in 1974, but they got sick and tired of corrupted textbooks, and they, I mean, the coal mines shut down to support the people, and that's the author there on the bottom, Carl Priest. He was giving this book out at the Capitol, and there's Gene, who was involved in that textbook battle. And so that basically, what I'm telling you is this: West Virginia has been at the forefront of some things. We have some terrible problems here. I know the sheriff will agree. I know, Tim, you look at the newspaper, how many, just about every day. It's sad. And the churches need to get together, and they can. I'm just asking you that maybe we start a revival by getting the churches free of the government, because I think that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of not being politically correct. So I want to thank you.
Okay.
I want to thank you very much.
Well, Bill, thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Regarding the alternate route for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, Mr. Bob Orndorff. Bob, welcome.
Thank you, Commissioners, and I always appreciate the opportunity to come here and apologize. I haven't been here for a while. I had to do my 3-month sentence in Charleston. Now that that's over, I'm trying to play catch-up. First, I want to address the two young men here that did the presentation earlier. My first job when I got out of college, it was in Manchester, Kentucky.
Is that right?
And it wasn't a pleasant area to work in. It was a rough area. So I'm glad that things have happened there, because it really need to happen.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order for agenda business, and the first item on the agenda will be public comment. Mr. Hudak has signed up, so Bill, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, sir. get off easy. This is a culmination of the 3 presentations that I've given.
Okay.
And, whoops. I just have a 3-page document to read to you. This is a First Amendment petition for timely action to be taken by the acting Randolph County Commissioners addressing the violation in Randolph County, West Virginia, of Article 6, Section 47 of the West Virginia Constitution. Article 6, Section 47 is as follows. No charter of incorporation shall be granted to any church or religious denomination. Provisions may be made by general laws for securing the title to church property and for the sale and transfer thereof, so that it shall be held, used, or transferred for the purposes of such church or religious denomination. In these 2 sentences, the framers of our 1872 state constitution secured churches from undue government influence and the ever-changing whims of political correction. The importance of civil rule of law and ecclesiastical rule of Scripture cannot be overemphasized. In reality, churches are non-taxable. They are not to be Caesar's properties or corporate creations. As God's ministries, they are to render unto God only. 2 years ago in a town hall meeting, Acting Attorney General Patrick Morrisey was questioned by me about the violation of Article 6, Section 47 in this very room. Mr. Morrisey indicated that I had already brought this to his attention and that he took the Constitution seriously and was looking into it. In January of 2015, a physical meeting took place in the State Law Library with Stephen Travis, a member of Mr. Morrisey's staff. That meeting was attended by 2 pastors, one being Pastor Mike House of Elkins, in which unlawful church incorporation was discussed. Sadly, after a total of 3 meetings with either Mr. Morrisey or his staff concerning a clear violation of the state's constitution, there has been no response, formal or otherwise. I have shown you my teaching contract, which includes a contract of oath to both state and federal constitution. To know and understand the rule of law is being violated, and especially when it is a constitutional violation, and to do nothing about it is considered a misprision of felony. I take misprision of felony very seriously, and so should you. Your oath of office, as was my signed and attested oath in my teaching contract, is just that, a contract. When you took an oath of office, it became an important part of your employment contract. To officially bind that oath between you and me, I have provided you with my personal acceptance of your oath. So that's a document that I have given you. Also, I accept your oath as a personal contract between us. I assure you that I hold no malice towards you. I don't believe you to be responsible for church incorporation in Randolph County. I don't believe the acting governor, acting state attorney general, acting state legislators, or acting state Supreme Court justices being responsible for churches throughout the state being incorporated. While I have presented information as to why I and others believe it happened, that is not the issue that needs attention. It is impossible to have and expect to keep a moral society with increasingly muzzled churches. I have no doubt that the framers of our Constitution understood this when they said concerning church property, quote, so that it shall be used or held, used, or transferred for the purposes of such church or religious denomination. By incorporating, the government has every right to dictate how it can be used, as it is a creation of the state government. I can and will gladly provide you with any documentation I have addressed, implied, or that I have that is relevant to this situation. Shortly you will receive copies of all documentation that I and others provided Mr. Morrisey and other public servants in Charleston, and were incorporated in Supreme Court of Appeals case 15-0491. My purpose in all this is to reestablish the rule of law between the people and their government, and to free the churches to be the ministries of God for all people. Upon formulation, I would like your plan of action in writing. I would also like the results of your actions to be summarized and presented in written form. We all bear responsibility to educate and take action concerning the rule of law, and it must be righteous law. Failing to do so will inevitably lead to the destruction of our land and impoverishment of our posterity. And I've signed that for you.
All right. Bill, we'll take your request under consideration.
I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 1:30. Welcome to the Randolph County Commission May 19th, 2016 meeting. We'll start off with under public comment. We've had two individuals sign up for public comment. Mr. Phil Huda, here to talk about church incorporation. Phil, we ask you to limit your remarks to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, commissioners, for allowing me to speak to you on this important situation, and I'm really not going to speak much today. I do want to share two pictures with you. Joyce said, you know, we want to deal with the needs, and I think we have a need. And this is a pencil drawing that I showed you before. And this is what's going to happen to the church if we continue to have churches incorporated, which is a creation of the government. So there's a contract which they have to abide by. So they're not free to necessarily say and do what they believe, you know, in their convictions is right. So I think we have a definite need. And a second picture is something I've never seen in my life, and I taught science for 40 years. This was a upside down rainbow at Pickens School 2 days ago on the 17th. In reality, after researching it, it's not a rainbow at all. It's actually made by ice crystals. So it's more like what they call a sundog. I've never seen anything like it in every picture I've seen. Nothing compared to this. As a matter of fact, it was a double. And if you go to my websites, hudoc.info or hudoc.com, I have these pictures. And you can actually see it's a double. And, you know, when you look at it, you say, there's something wrong. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but that flag up there, if it was turned upside down, that would not be a disgrace to the country. Who knows what it means? Mike?
Means in distress.
Means in distress. Means the country is in distress. A lot of people think it's you know, you're doing something you shouldn't do. It says in Scripture that the rainbow is a promise to us that there will never be a worldwide flood to destroy our land. I look at this and I immediately thought, wow, upside down, a symbol, distress. I think the Lord is in distress about what is happening in this country. And that's why I'm here. You know, we see a forcing of transgender bathrooms by the government in schools. How are they going to do that? I've heard some good things from Mr. Morrissey. And so, you know, if the government's going to do that, tell us we have to have transgender restrooms, what are they going to tell the churches who are incorporated, who are bound by contract? You know, I mean, if I had a contract with you, Mike, and it was a good contract, you would live up to it, wouldn't you? Yeah. And that's the problem we have. And our state constitution outright says they can't be incorporated. And I've had a researcher look at any statutes that even remotely gives churches the ability to incorporate, which they don't need to because they're non-taxable. Okay? And so, you know, if we have this and we have muzzled churches, we aren't going to have a moral society. And that's why our civilization is in distress. Okay? Tonight I'm starting a program on Channel 3, and it'll be the 3 preceding addresses that I've given to you with some other things that fit into this, okay? Because I won't quit. You know, my children, if my children have children, and my grandchildren, I'm worried about what's going to happen. And the forefathers in 1872 wrote that Constitution and knew you can't have the churches yoked to the state. Okay, so basically, I'm done. You know, I've asked you to take an action. You've taken an oath, and so I'm just here now to ask you because I did talk to Chris. He said, what are my plans? What would I like you to do? Well, I can't tell you what to do. I did make recommendations to Chris. I'm here listening now. What can you tell me? Or is there anything you can tell me?
And we're still taking it under review. And when we do make a statement or have an answer for you, we'll be sure to let you.
That answer, will it be in this kind of forum, or do I?
No, it'll be in the commission meeting. It'll be in the open meeting.
An agenda item, and I'll be notified. Well, I really appreciate that.
Okay.
I thank you.
All right, thank you. Items for discussion and action. Item A on the agenda is discuss a request petition from Phil Hudock regarding First Amendment of the Constitution. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, you were going to give me a response, correct? Or
yes.
Okay, well, do you want to give me the response first, or do you want me to talk first?
Well, go ahead and talk first.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, I just have a little item here from yesterday's news. I think the commissioners ought to be aware of, and the press too, because it involves, again, control and persecution of the church. And it's entitled, Churches Fear Iowa Law Will Silence Pastors, Open Church Bathrooms to Transgenders. And then on the third page I highlighted, it says, if they receive funds, local, state, federal, that takes them out of bona fide religious activity into public accommodation. What they don't tell you there is also Church and Corporation does the same thing. And I'm actually going to play a quote from Donald Trump where he told us that Church and Corporation, coming from LBJ 60 years ago, is stifling the churches, that they're afraid of the IRS. And on the last page of this I have highlighted, it says, this is from a pastor in Iowa, says, it's only a matter of time before militant LGBT activists try to target a congregation. It's only a matter of time. So I do want to play this. It's just a 1-minute quote by a presidential candidate, Donald Trump. I was surprised to hear this from Donald Trump. I didn't think of him as a very deeply religious man. But he met with a bunch of Christians from around the country who are very concerned about where this country's headed and the churches, because it was the churches that, they were called the Black Brigade back in the founding of the country. And they stood up and they spoke. So I'd like you to listen to this.
Tell me about your core, because you say a lot of good stuff out there, but people want to make sure that you're going to be able to deliver.
I'm Christian, I'm Protestant, I'm Presbyterian. I think that Christianity, frankly, I think the Christians in our country are not treated properly. I think all of your problems that I've seen at the bill that was passed during the Lyndon Johnson era is horrible, because I see churches where they're afraid to be outspoken because they don't want to lose their tax-exempt status. And I realize that that's one of the problems. I know people want to endorse me, they're afraid to endorse anybody because they don't want to get political. So essentially they're taking a lot of the power away from the church. I want to give power back to the church because the church has to have more power. Christians are really, Christianity is really being chopped. Little by little it's being taken away. I want people on Christmas to go into stores and see signs that say Merry Christmas again. And it's going to happen with me. It's going to happen with me. It's not going to happen with anybody else.
So you just invoked Lyndon Johnson there in 1952, the tax-exempt status. So just so I understand, you're basically saying that you want pastors to be more involved and speak more boldly from the pulpit like they did in Revolutionary War times. Is that it?
I want pastors to be able to speak. They're afraid to speak now. They're afraid to get involved in politics because of tax-exempt status. And I want pastors to be able to speak. I want them to be able to, like any other person can speak. I mean, if you think of it, they can't as much as other people that are walking down the street. I want pastors and ministers to be able to get up and speak on behalf of Christianity. And they're afraid to do it right now because they don't want to lose their tax-exempt status. We will take care of that.
That's exactly what we have here. And the amazing thing is, and I've got to read again from our West Virginia Constitution, Article 6, Section 47, 2 sentences. No charter of incorporation shall be granted to any church or religious denomination. Provisions may be made by general laws for securing the title to church property and for the sale and transfer thereof, so that it shall be held, used, or transferred for the purposes of such church or religious denomination. And we don't have to wait for the federal government to free the churches. Our Constitution frees the churches from the government. It's right here in our Constitution. And each one of us, everybody here, I don't care if it's the press, the sheriff, the county commissioners, the audience, it's our duty to see that we have the rule of law. And looking at the rule of law, I mean, look at this week, what's happened, where someone who should be indicted is not going to be. I mean, even Judge Napolitano said that. And so I've been here 4 times, and I've had to put this on Channel 3 to get this word out, because the Intermountain has not carried one word of what I've said here. They've never mentioned it. And I challenge Roger to put this kind of stuff in the newspaper. You know, the newspaper is the 4th estate, and if they don't do their job, how are the people going to make rational decisions, reasonable decisions based on the facts? So, you know, I just say we have a great opportunity here. You know, on the back of my shirt it says life, liberty, family, property, original intent, state sovereignty, and America first. I think it's a little bit wrong in that, yeah, it's America first in terms of all the countries, but here's really what's first. And that is God's first. Okay? And I'm glad you say a prayer. I think that's, you know, great that it was brought to the county commission. I actually think we ought to invoke the name of Jesus, because that's where the power is.
Okay, Phil. We and you have, you know, and with the information that you brought to us, each one of the commissioners you presented a copy with, and I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners to make any comments that they want to make in response to that, and then I have something to give you in summation. But I can tell you it is something that we've taken very seriously, and we have looked at, I have looked at, and have done what little bit of research that I can do about it, and I'll pass that on to you here in a minute. But Commissioner Johns, I'll refer to her first, and Joyce, your comments.
Well, I just have a question because I want to know exactly what you're wanting us to do. Write letters of support? Because, I mean, I've listened to you, but you haven't really come around now sometimes and say exactly what you want.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I addressed the State Attorney General in this room 2 years ago. I was promised an answer. I haven't got an answer. And I know quite often the Commission passes a resolution supporting some stand or some thought, you know what I mean? I was hoping that the County Commission could ask the State Attorney General what happens here. Why is our Constitution being violated, and what is the answer? Because for 2 years I haven't had an answer, and I know you're not strictly a enforcement body, and the enforcement body is right here in this room is Mark Grady. He's the highest law enforcement officer in the county, right, Mark?
I believe so. Foster actually is, but
well, you know, I think, you know, you've taken an oath to the Constitution, and so, you know, I'm bringing this to you now because from what I've gathered, the County Commission says, well, we're really more of a legislative body, and we can't enforce laws. However, I do know that they approve the budget, okay? And it's just like Congress has control over the president, but with the budget, whether they've used it or not, they do have control because of the budget. So, you know, I can't wait for something to happen, because nothing is happening with the people that I've taken this to. I filed a case in the state Supreme Court, and this was part of it, and it was never addressed, and yet they dismissed it without addressing it. You can't do that legally.
You can't dismiss something that's been brought to you, a complaint, without actually. So it's sad that all the way from, well, I'm putting in your laps because I took this to the highest court in the land. I took this to the highest law enforcement officer in the land, and I haven't got anything.
Okay. Anything further? Chris?
Have you, Mr. Goodlock, have you had anybody contacted churches stating that their constitutional rights are being violated here?
Yes, the Constitution Party, I produced a 2 DVD set, and I think I gave you copies of it. And that was given to the churches. Nobody responded. Now, I did, a local pastor of a big church in Elkins, I actually did approach him. And he didn't want to talk to me about it. Didn't even want to talk to me about it. And this is to free the churches. It's not to, it's just like Donald Trump says. And I think the reason they didn't respond is because they're so afraid of the IRS, just like Donald Trump said. And so, to be honest with you, there are some things about the IRS that I don't like, but that's not a battle that I'm willing to get into. However, it is my responsibility, and yours, and Sheriff Brady's, that the law is upheld.
Okay. Chris? Phil, the part of the research that I did on this issue was, and I have the same state code book that you have in front of you there, as noted in the subsection of that, Article 6, Chapter 47, in the second one, the responsibility of the courts. And it says the courts will take judicial notice of the provisions of this section inhibiting the granting of any charter of incorporation to any such church or religion and of its incompetency to become a corporation or to be sue or be sued, contracted or to be contracted with. And I think the discussion, and you and I have talked about this in my office, and I think the issue before us today is that the county commission lacks the authority to grant you the relief that you're requesting. It's not within our power or our purview to grant that, Phil. Your argument is with the courts. We don't have control over the courts. I know you said you filed an appeal you've talked to the Attorney General, you filed with the Supreme Court. That is not something that the county commission can pick up the phone and call the Supreme Court and say, you need to take another look at this. And in summary, because we have talked about this, I will say that as an individual commissioner and as this commission as a whole has undertaken a very serious review of the information you presented to this body a couple months ago. After consideration, it is the findings of this commission that we lack the authority to grant the relief that you request in your letter. Further, it is our recommendation that the proper venue for your issue would be with the judicial system.
On what level?
That's up to you to determine. I'm not going to sit here and, I really don't want to debate this with you, Phil, or that is, you wanted a response.
That's your response.
And that's our response. So, with that said, that will end our discussion of it. Okay?